Dr. Kimberly Warren's hands moved with practiced precision as she inserted the chest tube into her critically injured patient. The emergency department at Metro General buzzed with controlled chaos around her, but her focus remained laser-sharp. 15 years of emergency medicine had taught her to tune out everything except the task at hand. "BP's dropping, doctor," her nurse called out. 70/40. "Push another unit," Kim ordered, her voice steady despite the urgency. The young man on her table had taken 3 bullets to the chest in a drive-by shooting. She refused to lose him. The ED doors burst open, and Officer James Mitchell stormed in, his face flushed with anger. Kim barely registered his presence, continuing her life-saving procedure. She dealt with this particular cop before. His reputation for racial profiling and aggressive behavior was well known among the hospital staff. "Hey, you need to stop what you're doing right now," Mitchell's voice boomed across the trauma bay. Kim didn't even look up. "I'm in the middle of a critical procedure, officer. Whatever it is will have to wait." "The hell it will." Mitchell moved closer, his hand resting on his weapon. "I have questions about your last gunshot victim, and you're going to answer them now." "Sir," the charge nurse intervened, "Dr. Warren is performing a life-saving procedure." "You'll need to wait." Mitchell's face darkened. "I don't take orders from nurses, and I sure as hell don't take them from—" He bit off the rest of his sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Kim's jaw tightened, but she maintained her concentration. The chest tube was almost in place. Her patient's life depended on these crucial moments. "Step away from the patient." Mitchell grabbed Kim's arm, his fingers digging into her white coat. "Take your hands off me." Kim's voice cracked like a whip. "I am trying to save this man's life." "You're interfering with a police investigation," Mitchell snarled, yanking her backward. The sterile field was compromised as Kim's hands were forced away from her patient. The monitoring equipment screamed as the patient's vitals plummeted. The trauma team rushed to compensate for the interrupted procedure, but the damage was done. "Officer Mitchell," Kim said through gritted teeth, "you just endangered my patient's life. I'm calling hospital security and your supervisor." Mitchell's response was to spin her around and slam her against the wall, handcuffs appearing in his hands. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting a police officer." The ED fell silent except for the beeping monitors and the gasps of shocked staff members. Kim felt the cold metal close around her wrists as Mitchell roughly cuffed her, still wearing her bloody trauma gown and gloves. "You have the right to remain silent," Mitchell began, a smirk evident in his voice. What he didn't notice was the senior nurse quietly filming the entire incident on her phone, or the growing crowd of witnesses, their faces a mix of horror and determination. Kim met her head nurse's eyes and gave a slight nod. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Kim's wrists as Mitchell roughly marched her through the ED. Her surgical cap was askew, and blood-stained gloves still covered her hands, a grotesque testament to the interrupted procedure. "My patient could die because of you," she said, her voice vibrating with controlled fury. "Is that what you want on your conscience? Should have thought about that before you decided to obstruct justice." Mitchell sneered, shoving her forward. Hospital staff pressed against the walls, their phones now openly recording the scene. Dr. Marcus Chen, the chief of emergency medicine, emerged from his office, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Officer Mitchell, release Dr. Warren immediately. This is completely unacceptable." "Back off," Mitchell barked. "This is a police matter now. She's been interfering with an active investigation." "By saving lives." Dr. Chen stepped closer. "I'm calling the police commissioner right now." Mitchell's grip tightened on Kim's arm. "Go ahead." "Meanwhile, this one's coming with me." As they approached the ED exit, Kim noticed Nurse Rodriguez speaking rapidly into her phone while reading Mitchell's badge number from the footage she'd captured. Several patients had their phones out too, and she could hear the whispers. Is this really happening? Did he just arrest a doctor during surgery? The automatic doors slid open, letting in a blast of cold night air. Kim's surgical gown offered little protection against the chill, but the adrenaline coursing through her system kept her from feeling it. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail of Mitchell's actions, every witness, and every violation of protocol. "You're making a huge mistake," she said quietly, her professional calm masking the storm brewing beneath. One you won't be able to walk away from. Mitchell leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. Listen here, doctor. Your kind always thinks you're above the law, but I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect. The racial undertone in his words was unmistakable. Kim straightened her spine, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. My kind? You mean Harvard-educated trauma surgeons who save lives while dealing with racist cops? His face contorted with rage as he yanked open the patrol car's back door. Get in. Before he could force her inside, a voice rang out across the ambulance bay. Officer Mitchell. Stand down immediately. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez strode toward them, her badge gleaming under the emergency lights. She'd clearly been summoned by one of the hospital staff, and her expression promised consequences. Mitchell's grip on Kim's arm faltered, but his jaw set stubbornly. The night was far from over, and the power dynamic was about to shift dramatically. Lieutenant Martinez's footsteps echoed across the ambulance bay as she closed the distance, her face carved from stone. Release Dr. Kim. Now. Mitchell's fingers flexed on Kim's arm, his internal struggle visible in the twitch of his jaw. Lieutenant, this doctor has been interfering with. I said now, officer. Martinez's voice could have frozen flame. Or your badge hits my desk before sunrise. The handcuffs finally loosened. Kim brought her hands forward slowly, rolling her shoulders to ease the strain. The growing crowd of hospital staff and patients maintained a respectful distance, but their phones continued recording every moment. Dr. Warren, Martinez said, her tone softening slightly, would you like to press charges? Before Kim could respond, Dr. Chen emerged with the hospital's legal counsel, Patricia Montgomery, in tow. The attorney's heels clicked purposefully against the pavement as she approached. Dr. Warren will be filing a formal complaint, Montgomery stated, her voice precise and measured. But first, she needs to return to her patient, assuming Officer Mitchell's actions haven't already resulted in a fatality. Mitchell's face reddened. You can't just, Officer Martinez cut in, return to the precinct immediately. You're suspended pending investigation. This is bullshit. Mitchell exploded. You're all taking her side without even that's enough. Martinez stepped into his space, her authority radiating like heat. Car, precinct. Now. And Mitchell. She lowered her voice to a dangerous whisper. If that patient dies, this suspension will be the least of your concerns. Kim watched the exchange with clinical detachment, cataloging every detail for the statement she'd inevitably have to give. But her mind was already racing back to her patient, calculating the minutes lost, the potential complications. I need to get back inside, she said, already moving toward the ED entrance. Patricia, we'll talk later. Lieutenant Martinez, thank you. As Kim strode back through the automatic doors, she heard Martinez beginning to take statements from witnesses. The night shift's usual chaos had transformed into something more focused. Nurses and techs moved with renewed purpose, their faces showing a mixture of concern and determination. Her trauma team looked up as she entered, their relief palpable. Patient status. She called out, already reaching for fresh gloves. We managed to complete the chest tube insertion, Dr. Shen reported. He's critical but stable. BP's improving. Kim nodded, her professional mask firmly in place, despite the trembling fury in her chest. She had a job to do, lives to save, patients to protect. The rest, Mitchell, the complaint, the inevitable media storm, would have to wait. But as she began examining her patient, Kim's mind was already formulating a plan. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every doctor, every patient, and every person who'd ever been victimized by someone drunk on authority and poisoned by prejudice. Mitchell had no idea what he'd just started. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of trauma cases and procedures, but Kim's mind remained razor-sharp. Each movement, each decision was executed with even more precision than usual. She knew every eye in the ED was watching, waiting to see if Mitchell's assault had rattled her. At 3 a.m. she finally stepped into her office, closing the door with a soft click. Only then did she allow her hands to shake, releasing the iron control she'd maintained since the incident. Her phone screen lit up with missed calls and messages, colleagues, journalists, even her mother. But one text caught her attention immediately. Dr. Warren, this is Ben Richardson from the ACLU. We'd like to discuss your case. What happened tonight fits a pattern we've been tracking. Kim sank into her chair, her surgical cap still on her head. A pattern. Of course it was a pattern. She pulled up Mitchell's name on her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed public records. What she found made her blood boil. 3 previous complaints of excessive force, all against minorities. 2 dismissed, 1 settled quietly. Multiple reports of unprofessional conduct during hospital visits, all buried under layers of administrative protection and union interference. A knock at her door preceded Patricia Montgomery's entrance. The attorney's perfectly pressed suit contrasted sharply with Kim's rumpled scrubs. "I've been doing some digging," Patricia said, settling into a chair. Mitchell's body cam was conveniently turned off during the incident. "But we have 12 different phone recordings, 4 security cameras, and 27 witness statements." Kim leaned forward. "Tell me about his previous cases." "That's the interesting part." Patricia opened her laptop. 3 months ago, he arrested a black nurse at County General for interfering when she refused to draw blood from an unconscious suspect without a warrant. Case was buried. 6 months before that, similar incident with a respiratory therapist at St. Luke's. "He's targeting medical professionals of color," Kim said softly, the pattern crystallizing in her mind. "Making examples of us. Yes, but this time he miscalculated." Patricia's smile was sharp. "You're not just any Dr. Kim, you're the youngest chief of trauma in Metro General's history, with connections throughout the medical community. And Mitchell just handed us everything we need on a silver platter." Kim's phone buzzed again, another journalist requesting comment. She ignored it, her mind racing ahead to the next steps. This wasn't just about filing a complaint anymore. This was about systematic change. "Patricia," she said, her voice steady, "I want to go public. Not just with my case, but with all of them. Every medical professional he's targeted, every patient he's endangered. It's time to break the pattern." The attorney's eyes gleamed with approval. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I've already started building the class action lawsuit." Dawn was breaking over the city when Kim finally left her office, Patricia's words still ringing in her ears. The class action lawsuit would take time to build, but they had something more immediate planned. As she walked through the ED's quiet corridors, her phone vibrated with a new message from the hospital's PR director. "Press conference scheduled for 9 a.m. CNN confirmed. The night shift staff were finishing their handovers, but they paused as she passed, offering silent nods of support. Kim had spent the last 2 hours helping Patricia compile their initial documentation, including statements from other medical professionals who'd faced similar intimidation. In the doctor's lounge, she found Dr. Chen waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "You should go home, get some rest before the press conference," he said, handing her one. "Can't. Got another trauma coming in 15 minutes. Kim took a long sip, savoring the bitter warmth. "Besides, going home is exactly what Mitchell would want, to see me rattled, disrupted." "Speaking of Mitchell," Chen lowered his voice, "word from my contact at the precinct is he's trying to build a counter-narrative, claiming you were protecting a gang member, obstructing justice." Kim's laugh was cold. "My patient was a 19-year-old college student, caught in crossfire while walking home from his study group. But Mitchell didn't bother to verify that before he decided to play judge and jury." The trauma alert system suddenly blared to life. Kim was already moving, coffee forgotten, when Chen caught her arm. "Kim, wait. There's something else." His expression was grave. "Mitchell's father is Deputy Chief Mitchell. This might get uglier than we anticipated." She processed this new information with clinical detachment. "Good. The higher they are, the harder they fall. And I'm done watching bullies with badges endanger my patients." As she strode toward the incoming trauma, Kim's phone lit up with another text. This one from Nurse Rodriguez. "You need to see this. Mitchell's previous victims are coming forward on social media. #Justice for Dr. Warren is trending." The ED doors burst open as paramedics wheeled in a new critical patient. Kim snapped on fresh gloves, her focus narrowing to the immediate crisis before her. But part of her mind was already strategizing, planning the next moves in what was becoming a chess game with potentially historic implications. The young paramedic giving report faltered when she recognized Kim. Dr. Warren, I saw the videos, we all did. The entire EMS community is behind you. Kim nodded briskly, already assessing the patient. Thank you. Now tell me about those vital signs. As she worked, Kim could feel the momentum building beyond the hospital walls. Mitchell had meant to make an example of her, to put her in her place. Instead, he'd inadvertently sparked something much bigger, a reckoning that was about to shake the entire system to its core. The trauma bay hummed with focused energy as Kim finished stabilizing her latest patient. Through the glass walls, she could see news vans gathering in the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the brightening sky like mechanical flowers. Dr. Warren, her resident, whispered as they finished the final sutures. Deputy Chief Mitchell is in the lobby. With lawyers, Kim maintained her steady hands, completing the last stitch with textbook precision. Is he? Well, let him wait. I have 3 more patients to round on before that press conference. The resident's eyes widened. But shouldn't you? What I shouldn't do, Kim interrupted smoothly, is let anyone think they can intimidate me into abandoning my patients. She stripped off her gloves and added, please update the family while I check on bed 7. As she moved through her rounds, Kim was acutely aware of the hospital's security team shadowing her discreetly. They'd doubled their presence since the incident, not trusting the police to maintain professional boundaries. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, Deputy Chief trying to force a private meeting. Don't engage. Let them sweat. Kim smiled slightly as she reviewed her next patient's chart. The old playbook, pressure, intimidate, then offer a quiet settlement, wouldn't work this time. She'd spent the night building a different strategy, one that would force everything into the light. Nurse Rodriguez appeared at her elbow with a tablet. Someone leaked Mitchell's disciplinary record. There are incidents we didn't even know about. The record detailed a pattern spanning 7 years, harassment, excessive force, and racial profiling, all buried under bureaucratic paperwork and unprotection. But what caught Kim's attention was a note about an incident 3 years ago at another hospital involving a black pediatric surgeon. Find that doctor, Kim told Rodriguez, and check if Patricia already has this information. The ED's atmosphere shifted suddenly, and Kim looked up to see Deputy Chief Mitchell himself striding toward her, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. His face carried the same arrogant authority as his son's, but with an added layer of political calculation. Before he could reach her, Dr. Shen stepped smoothly into his path. I'm sorry, sir, but this is a restricted area. Patient privacy regulations. I need to speak with Dr. Warren immediately, the deputy chief demanded, his voice carrying the weight of decades of unquestioned authority. Kim continued writing in her patient's chart, deliberately unhurried. Let him learn what it felt like to be powerless, to have his authority questioned. Behind him, she could see hospital staff positioning themselves strategically, phones ready to record any confrontation. The power dynamics were shifting minute by minute, and everyone in the ED could feel it. The old system of quiet intimidation was about to meet something it had never fully encountered before: organized, documented, public resistance. Dr. Warren, Deputy Chief Mitchell called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that expected immediate compliance. This situation can be resolved quietly, to everyone's benefit. Kim finished her chart notation with deliberate precision, then turned to face him. The contrast between them was stark, her in surgical scrubs bearing the night's work, him in his pressed uniform with polished brass. Everyone's benefit, she repeated softly, yet loud enough for the watching staff to hear. Like the benefit to my patient when your son interrupted a critical procedure, or the benefit to the 3 other medical professionals who were similarly assaulted but pressured into silence. The deputy chief's jaw tightened. One of his lawyers stepped forward, smooth as oil. Dr. Warren, we're prepared to offer a very generous settlement, along with a formal apology from the department. Interesting timing, Kim replied, maintaining eye contact with the deputy chief. Is this offer because of my credentials, or because #police brutality and #justice for Dr. Warren are the top trending topics this morning? A small crowd had gathered, nurses, techs, even patients in wheelchairs. Every phone was raised, recording. The deputy chief's face darkened as he realized his usual private intimidation tactics wouldn't work here. This is a complex situation, he began, but Kim cut him off. No, it's quite simple. Your son has a documented history of targeting medical professionals of color. He endangered patients' lives to satisfy his need for racial dominance. And you," she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a surgical precision. "You helped cover it up. How many others were there? How many times did you bury the complaints?" The lawyer tried to interject, but Kim held up her hand. "The press conference starts in 20 minutes. I'll be detailing every incident we've uncovered, including the ones you thought were safely hidden. But first," she glanced at her watch, "I have patients to see." She turned her back on them, a calculated risk that made her pulse quicken, and walked to her next patient's bed. Behind her, she heard the deputy chief's angry whisper, "This isn't over." "You're right," she said without turning around. "It's just beginning." Dr. Chen appeared at her side as she checked her patient's vitals. "Security has their eyes on them," he murmured. "And the hospital board just released a statement fully supporting you. They're live-streaming the press conference." Kim nodded, making notes in the chart. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing ahead, anticipating the deputy chief's next moves. He hadn't risen to his position without learning how to fight dirty. But then her phone buzzed with another message, this one from the pediatric surgeon Mitchell had targeted 3 years ago. "Count me in. I'm ready to tell my story. And I have documentation." The hospital's media room buzzed with anticipation as cameras were adjusted and microphones tested. Kim stood in the adjacent hallway, reviewing her prepared statement one final time while Patricia briefed her on last-minute developments. 3 more victims came forward in the last hour," Patricia whispered, "including a respiratory therapist who has video footage from 2 years ago. Mitchell Sr. is trying to block its release, claiming it's part of an ongoing investigation." Kim's phone vibrated. Another message from Ben Richardson of the ACLU. "We've identified 14 cases of Mitchell targeting medical professionals of color across 3 hospitals. Pattern spans 8 years. Ready to go public when you give the word." The hospital's PR director approached, tablet in hand. "Dr. Warren, you need to see this. Officer Mitchell just gave an interview to Channel 5, claiming you have a history of protecting gang members and impeding police investigations." "Perfect," Kim said, surprising them both. "He's getting sloppy, desperate. Let him talk." Through the glass partition, she could see Deputy Chief Mitchell and his lawyers seated in the back row of the press room, their faces tight with barely contained anger. They'd tried 3 more times to force a private meeting, each attempt more aggressive than the last. 2 minutes, the PR director murmured. Kim straightened her white coat, fresh and crisp, deliberately chosen over scrubs for this moment. Her hospital ID badge gleamed under the lights, its credentials clear: Kimberly Warren, MD, FES, and Chief of Trauma Surgery. "Remember," Patricia said softly, "they'll try to paint this as a personal vendetta. Stay focused on the pattern, the public safety aspect." Kim nodded, thinking of the young patient who'd nearly died because of Mitchell's actions. "Trust me, they have no idea what's coming." The Puerto Rico director gestured, and Kim walked into the media room. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. She took her place behind the podium, aware of every eye on her, every lens capturing this moment. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. In the back, she could see Deputy Chief Mitchell leaning forward, probably hoping she'd show signs of nervousness or uncertainty. Instead, Kim smiled, the same calm, confident smile she gave patients before difficult procedures. Then she opened a folder containing not just her statement, but documented evidence of every case they'd uncovered, including internal police reports that someone had mysteriously leaked overnight. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Last night, Officer James Mitchell assaulted me while I was performing a life-saving procedure, endangering my patient's life. But this press conference isn't about me." She paused, meeting the deputy chief's gaze directly. "This is about a systemic pattern of racial targeting and abuse of power that has endangered countless patients and medical professionals. And today we're going to examine that pattern in detail." In the back of the room, the deputy chief's face went pale as she held up the first document. Over the past 8 years, Kim continued, her voice steady and clinical, Officer Mitchell has engaged in at least 14 documented incidents of harassment and assault against medical professionals of color. She held up a series of photographs. These incidents occurred across 3 different hospitals, following an identical pattern of intimidation and abuse of authority. The journalists leaned forward, cameras clicking rapidly. In the back row, Deputy Chief Mitchell was frantically whispering to his lawyers. But the real story, Kim said, changing slides on the presentation screen behind her, isn't just about Officer Mitchell. It's about a system that protected him. A system that valued police authority over patient safety. A system that repeatedly chose to silence victims rather than address the root cause. She gestured to the screen, where security footage began playing, showing Mitchell's previous confrontations with medical staff. These incidents were buried. Victims were pressured into silence. Complaints were mysteriously lost. Until now, the door at the back of the room opened, and heads turned as Dr. Bea Patali, the pediatric surgeon from 3 years ago, walked in. She was followed by 2 nurses, a respiratory therapist, and 3 other medical professionals, all victims of Mitchell's previous attacks. They lined up silently along the wall, a living testament to the pattern Kim was exposing. Each of these healthcare professionals has agreed to testify, Kim announced. They bring with them documentation, witnesses, and in several cases video evidence that was supposedly lost during previous investigations. Deputy Chief Mitchell stood abruptly, his face mottled with rage. This is a coordinated attack on law enforcement. These allegations are our what, Deputy Chief? Kim's voice cut through his protest like a scalpel. Are documented in your own internal affairs reports? She held up another folder. Reports that show you personally intervened to dismiss complaints against your son? The room erupted with questions from journalists. Camera flashes intensified. The deputy chief's lawyers were tugging at his sleeve, trying to get him to sit down, but he remained standing, his authority crumbling in real time. We have prepared detailed documentation packets for every journalist present, Kim continued, as hospital staff began distributing thick folders. These include testimony from patients whose care was interrupted, medical records showing the impact of these interventions, and a timeline of departmental cover-ups. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. But most importantly, we have questions that demand answers. How many patients were endangered? How many careers were threatened? And how long will we allow badges to be used as weapons against medical professionals who are simply trying to save lives? The deputy chief finally lost his composure. You'll regret this, he shouted over the chaos. You have no idea what you're starting. Kim's smile was razor sharp. Actually, Deputy Chief, I know exactly what I'm starting. This is called accountability. The press conference exploded into controlled chaos as journalists shouted questions. Kim maintained her professional composure, selecting reporters with surgical precision while watching Deputy Chief Mitchell's increasingly agitated movements from her peripheral vision. Dr. Warren called out a CNN reporter. Are you concerned about potential retaliation from the police department? I'm more concerned about the next patient who might die because an officer decides their authority trumps medical necessity, Kim responded. Which is why we're announcing the formation of the Medical Professional Protection Alliance, effective immediately. This was the bombshell she'd been holding back, the result of her night's work with Patricia and hospital administrators across the city. Behind her, the screen displayed the logos of 12 major hospitals, 3 medical associations, and the ACLU. The Alliance will provide legal support, documentation resources, and protective measures for any medical professional facing law enforcement interference with patient care, Kim explained. We're also establishing a rapid response team of attorneys and advocates who can be on site within minutes of an incident. Deputy Chief Mitchell pushed past his lawyers and strode toward the podium. This is an orchestrated attack on police authority. You're undermining law enforcement's ability to what? Kim interrupted, her voice sharp. To assault doctors during procedures, to endanger patients' lives, to target medical professionals based on their race? Security personnel moved smoothly to intercept the deputy chief as he reached the front of the room. The cameras swiveled to capture his rage-contorted face. Every hospital in this city has security cameras, Kim continued, addressing the room rather than Mitchell. Every medical professional has a phone. Every incident will be documented. The days of quiet intimidation are over. She gestured to Dr. Patel and the other victims, who stepped forward. These brave professionals will now share their stories. But first, I'd like to address Officer Mitchell directly, since I'm sure he's watching. Kim turned to face the main camera, her expression stern but composed. You chose the wrong profession to target, Officer Mitchell. We save lives for a living. We face death daily. We make split-second decisions that determine whether someone's child, parent or spouse survives. If you thought we would be easy to intimidate, you fundamentally misunderstood who we are. The room fell silent as she paused, then delivered her final blow. And Deputy Chief Mitchell, regarding your son's claim that I have a history of protecting gang members. The patient your son prevented me from treating last night was Kevin Chen, a pre-med honors student at State University. He died 20 minutes ago due to complications from the interrupted procedure. The announcement hit the room like a thunderbolt. Deputy Chief Mitchell froze mid-step, his face draining of color as the implications sank in. And yes, Kim added quietly, his family's lawyers are already here. The revelation of Kevin Chen's death transformed the press conference's atmosphere instantly. Journalists who had been aggressive became somber, their questions taking on a more serious tone. Deputy Chief Mitchell was quickly hustled out by his lawyers, his face ashen as reporters shouted questions about potential manslaughter charges. Dr. Patel stepped to the podium, her voice steady as she began sharing her story. Kim moved to stand beside her other colleagues, forming a visual wall of solidarity. Her phone vibrated continuously, messages from medical professionals across the country, offering support and sharing similar experiences. One message caught her attention. Dr. Warren, I'm Kevin Chen's faculty advisor. His research was on racial bias in emergency medical care. He would have wanted his death to mean something. Kim's throat tightened, but she maintained her professional demeanor. This was exactly why the alliance was necessary, to ensure no other medical professional had to watch a patient die because of law enforcement overreach. The hospital's legal team slipped her a note. Mitchell Jr. just tried to access the hospital's security footage. IT blocked him. He's becoming erratic. Good, Kim thought. Let him panic. Let him make mistakes. Every desperate action would only strengthen their case. Another message flashed across her screen. This one from Lieutenant Martinez. Mitchell Jr. just cleaned out his locker and left the precinct. His father can't reach him. Be careful. Kim shared the message with security, watching as they discreetly increased their presence around the room. She knew Mitchell's type. When cornered, they often lashed out violently. But she had anticipated this, had planned for it. Dr. Patel finished her testimony, her voice breaking as she described how Mitchell had arrested her in the middle of a pediatric emergency, causing complications that left a 6-year-old with permanent disabilities. The room was dead silent except for the sound of cameras clicking. As the next victim stepped forward to speak, Kim noticed Patricia signaling her urgently from the doorway. She quietly excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Mitchell Jr. was just spotted in the hospital parking garage, Patricia whispered. He's armed and in civilian clothes. Hospital security is tracking him on cameras. Kim nodded, her mind already calculating options. Tell security not to engage. He's looking for a confrontation, trying to create a scenario where he can claim our. Should we stop the press conference? No, Kim said firmly. That's exactly what they want, to silence us through fear. Instead, let's give Officer Mitchell an audience he wasn't expecting. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to the hospital's PR director. Within moments, the press conference livestream was being broadcast on every monitor in the hospital, including the security screens in the parking garage. Mitchell would be able to see exactly what was happening in the media room, would know that Evo, move he made, was being watched and recorded. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The security feed showed Mitchell pacing in the parking garage, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he watched the press conference on his phone. Every few minutes he would reach inside his jacket, touching what security assumed was his personal weapon. He's deteriorating, Lieutenant Martinez murmured, having arrived minutes earlier. She stood with Kim and Patricia in the hospital security office, watching the feeds. This is exactly what we're trained to recognize as pre-violent behavior. Kim studied the multiple camera angles, noting how Mitchell kept returning to the area near her assigned parking space. "He's waiting for me," she said calmly. "Probably thinks he can force a private confrontation, make it look like self-defense when I attacked him." "We should evacuate the building," the head of security suggested, but Kim shook her head. "No, that's not how we end this." She turned to Patricia. "How many victims are still waiting to testify?" "4 more. We've saved the most damaging cases for last." Kim's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. "Mitchell's father just called the ed demanding to know your schedule. We gave him nothing." "Perfect," Kim said, a plan crystallizing in her mind. "Lieutenant Martinez, I need your help. We're going to give Officer Mitchell exactly what he wants, but on our terms." She outlined her strategy quickly. Martinez's eyes widened, then narrowed with approval. "Risky," she said, "but it could work. And everything would be on camera." "Patricia." Kim turned to her lawyer. The attorney was already nodding. "Legally clean. He's here without authorization, armed, showing clear intent. Everything that follows would be documented self-defense on our part." Kim checked the time. "The next testimony starts in 3 minutes. That's our window." She turned to the security team. "I need every camera in that garage recording. Multiple angles. And I need the press conference feed playing on every screen he might see." Martinez was already on her radio, quietly positioning plainclothes officers. The trap was being set, but its success would depend entirely on Mitchell's psychological state, his need to assert dominance, to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond his grasp. "Dr. Warren," Patricia caught her arm, "are you sure about this? He's armed and unstable." Kim's smile was grim. "That's exactly why this needs to happen. Men like Mitchell don't stop until they're forced to face consequences. Real consequences, not just administrative ones." She watched the security feed as Mitchell checked his phone again, his face contorting with rage as another victim detailed their experience with his abuse of power. "Besides," Kim added softly, "he's not the only one who knows how to set a trap." The parking garage's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Kim walked purposefully toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the concrete space. Her white coat was like a beacon under the artificial lighting, a deliberate choice. Through her earpiece, she could hear Martinez coordinating positions. "Target is moving," the lieutenant's voice was barely a whisper. "3rd level, coming down the west stairwell." Kim maintained her pace, appearing focused on her phone as if checking messages. Every movement was calculated to project vulnerability while concealing her complete awareness of the situation. The security cameras tracked her progress, their feeds being monitored by both hospital security and police tactical teams. The sound of a door opening echoed through the garage. Then footsteps, trying to be quiet but betraying urgency. "Dr. Warren." Mitchell's voice carried a dangerous edge. "We need to talk." Kim stopped, turning slowly to face him. He stood 20 feet away, his civilian clothes rumpled, his face showing the strain of the past 18 hours. His right hand stayed near his jacket, close to his concealed weapon. "Officer Mitchell," she replied calmly, "or should I say former Officer Mitchell. I heard about your resignation." "Shut up." He took 3 aggressive steps forward. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Turning everyone against me, destroying my career?" "You destroyed your own career," Kim said, her voice clinical. "Just like you destroyed Kevin Chen's life. A 19-year-old pre-med student. He could have been a doctor someday." Mitchell's face contorted. "He was interfering with what?" Kim's voice sharpened. "What exactly was so urgent that you had to interrupt a critical procedure? Or was it just that you couldn't stand seeing a black woman in authority, refusing to bow to your demands?" "You people always play the race card," he snarled, moving closer. "Always acting like you're above the law." "The law?" Kim laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "Is that what you call assaulting medical professionals? Endangering patients? Following a pattern of racial targeting that spans 8 years?" His hand moved to his jacket. "I said shut up." "Or what?" Kim stepped forward, her voice steady. "You'll assault another doctor? Add to the evidence we're presenting? Because right now, you're being recorded from 12 different angles, and your father can't protect you anymore." Mitchell's eyes darted around, finally noticing the security cameras and the screen showing the ongoing press conference where his latest victim was describing how he had interrupted a pediatric resuscitation. "You set me up," he whispered, realization dawning. "No, Officer Mitchell," Kim replied. "You set yourself up. I just made sure everyone could see who you really are." His hand emerged with the gun. "Drop the weapon." Lieutenant Martinez's command rang out as she and 4 officers emerged from their positions, weapons drawn. Mitchell spun wildly, his gun wavering between Kim and the officers. James Martinez's voice softened slightly, using crisis intervention techniques. "Think about what you're doing. This is being broadcast live. The press conference feeds are showing everything." Kim remained perfectly still, her medical training kicking in, analyzing Mitchell's physiological signs of extreme stress. The tremor in his gun hand, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the garage's cool temperature. "You don't understand," Mitchell's voice cracked. "She ruined everything. My career, my father's reputation." "You did that yourself," Kim interrupted, her tone deliberately calm, almost clinical. "Every time you chose to abuse your authority, every time you targeted a medical professional of color, every time you put your need for racial dominance above patient safety." "Shut up!" The gun swung back toward her. "You think you're so superior with your medical degree and your fancy title? No, Officer Mitchell. I think I'm a trauma surgeon trying to save lives. Something you made impossible for Kevin Chen last night." The mention of Chen's name made Mitchell flinch. In that moment of distraction, Martinez's team moved closer, tightening the circle. "It's over, James," Martinez said firmly. "Don't add armed assault to the charges. Your father can't fix this one." Mitchell's eyes darted between the officers, the cameras, and Kim. She could see the moment reality finally penetrated his rage, the understanding that he'd walked into a trap of his own making. "You planned this," he said, staring at Kim with a mixture of hatred and dawning comprehension. "You knew I'd come here." "Yes," Kim replied simply, "because men like you are predictable. When you lose power over others, you resort to violence. But this time everyone is watching." She gestured to the security screens where the press conference feed showed split-screen coverage, the ongoing testimonies alongside live footage of the garage confrontation. Mitchell's face drained of color as he realized the full extent of his exposure. "Last chance," James Martinez warned. "Drop the weapon." The gun trembled in Mitchell's hand as the last vestige of his authority crumbled. In his eyes, Kim could see the desperate calculation, the realization that every possible action would only worsen his situation. "You did this," he whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You took everything," the garage echoed with sudden movement. The next few seconds unfolded in slow motion. As Mitchell's finger tensed on the trigger, Kim's trauma surgeon instincts took over. She noted every detail with clinical precision, the slight muscle twitch in his forearm, the dilation of his pupils, and the microsecond of hesitation that telegraphed his intent. Martinez's team moved with coordinated precision. 2 officers tackled Mitchell from behind while another executed a perfect arm bar takedown. The gun clattered across the concrete floor, spinning harmlessly away as Mitchell was secured. "James Mitchell," Martinez's voice carried clearly for the cameras, "you're under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, and attempted murder of a medical professional." As they read him his rights, Mitchell's facade finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," he screamed, struggling against the handcuffs. "They're taking over everything." "Our hospitals, our schools, there it is," Kim said quietly, making sure the cameras picked up her words. "The real reason for targeting medical professionals of color. Not about law enforcement at all, was it, Officer Mitchell? Just raw racism wrapped in a badge." His eyes blazed with unmasked hatred as they led him away. "My father," your father," Kim interrupted, "is currently watching this live stream along with millions of others. I suspect he's already drafting his resignation letter." Martinez paused beside Kim as her officers escorted Mitchell out. "That was gutsy, Dr. Warren. Using yourself as bait. Sometimes the only way to remove a tumor is to let it expose itself fully," Kim replied, her medical metaphor deliberate. "He needed to show everyone exactly who he is." Her phone buzzed with urgent messages. The press conference had erupted into chaos as the garage confrontation played out on the split screen. Social media was exploding with clips of Mitchell's racist rant, his mask finally stripped away. Dr. Warren, one of the tactical officers, called out, "We found something in his car." Notes about other medical professionals he was targeting. Lists of their schedules, parking locations. Kim nodded grimly. Document everything. This wasn't just about me. He was planning a campaign of intimidation. Martinez's face hardened as she examined the evidence. This goes beyond harassment. This was premeditated stalking with intent to harm. The DA will have a field day. As they walked back toward the hospital, Kim's phone lit up with a message from Patricia. Deputy Chief Mitchell just resigned, effective immediately. Internal Affairs is opening investigations into every case he handled involving medical personnel. The system's walls were finally crumbling, but Kim knew this was just the beginning. Mitchell was a symptom of a deeper disease, one that would require long-term treatment to cure. Back in the hospital's main lobby, Kim was met with a wave of applause from staff and patients alike. She raised her hand for silence, maintaining her professional composure despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Return to your duties," she instructed the staff firmly. "Our patients need us focused." As the crowd dispersed, Patricia rushed forward with her tablet. "You need to see this." Police departments across the country are launching internal reviews of similar incidents. Your confrontation with Mitchell broke open a national conversation. Kim scanned the headlines flooding across social media. Medical professionals fight back against police intimidation, racial targeting in hospitals, a systemic problem. Doctors stand against corrupt cop reveals deeper pattern. Dr. Warren, a young resident, approached hesitantly. "The Chen family is here. They're asking to speak with you." Kim's heart tightened. In the chaos of the confrontation, she'd almost forgotten about Kevin's parents. "Where are they?" "Private consultation room 3. The walk to the consultation room felt longer than usual. Kim had done countless family notifications in her career, but this one was different. As she opened the door, she found Mr. and Mrs. Chen sitting together, their faces bearing the hollow look of parents who'd lost a child. "Dr. Warren," Mr. Chen stood, his voice rough with emotion. "We saw what happened in the garage." "What you did, what I did, was my duty," Kim said softly. "Both to Kevin and to every other patient at risk from this kind of abuse of power." Mrs. Chen reached for Kim's hand. Kevin's research, he was studying exactly this. How racial bias in law enforcement affects medical care in emergency situations. He would have been proud to see someone finally taking a stand. "We want to help," Mr. Chen added. "We want to establish a foundation in Kevin's name. To support medical professionals who face similar situations, to fund research into preventing these incidents." Before Kim could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Patricia. Mitchell's notes revealed a network. Other officers in other cities coordinating similar intimidation campaigns against medical professionals of color. "FBI just opened an investigation." Kim looked at the Chens, seeing the determination through their grief. "I think I know exactly how we can honor Kevin's memory," she said. "But it's going to require taking this fight national." "Mrs. Chen straightened in her chair. "Tell us what you need." Outside the consultation room, Kim could hear the hospital buzzing with renewed purpose. What had started as one confrontation in an emergency room was expanding into something much larger, a systematic challenge to institutionalized racism in both law enforcement and healthcare. The real work was just beginning. 3 days after Mitchell's arrest, Kim sat in her office, reviewing the mounting evidence that Patricia's team had assembled. The FBI investigation had uncovered a private messaging group where officers from multiple jurisdictions shared strategies for intimidating medical professionals of color, complete with target lists and surveillance photos. "We've identified 38 officers across 12 states," Agent Sarah Rodriguez explained via video conference. "They called themselves the Thin Blue Guard. Their specific focus was maintaining what they termed traditional authority structures in medical settings." "Traditional authority structures," Kim repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You mean white male dominance?" "Exactly. They particularly targeted female doctors and nurses of color in leadership positions. Mitchell's notes suggest they saw the increasing diversity in medical leadership as a threat to their control." A knock at her office door interrupted them. Dr. Chen entered, looking grave. "Kim, you need to see this. Mitchell Sr. just gave an interview on Fox News. Kim pulled up the footage on her computer. Agent Rodriguez still listening in. The former deputy chief sat across from a sympathetic interviewer, attempting to paint his son as the victim of a coordinated attack on law enforcement by radical elements in the medical community. "These doctors think they're above the law," Mitchell Sr. declared. "They hide behind their credentials while protecting criminals and undermining police authority. My son was just trying to maintain order." Kim muted the video, having heard enough. "Agent Rodriguez, please tell me you have the messages where Senior Mitchell coordinated with other department heads to bury complaints." "We do, and more. We found evidence that he personally selected which medical professionals to target, focusing on those he thought would be too intimidated to fight back. He chose poorly," Dr. Chen remarked dryly. Kim's phone lit up with a message from the Chen family's lawyer. "Civil rights lawsuit filed this morning. Class action status requested. Already have 47 medical professionals signed on as plaintiffs." Another message followed immediately from Patricia. "American Medical Association just issued statement condemning police intimidation in healthcare settings. They're implementing new protocols for reporting and responding to law enforcement interference. It's spreading faster than we anticipated." Kim told Agent Rodriguez. "How do we ensure this doesn't turn into us versus them narrative between medical professionals and law enforcement?" "Already on it," the agent replied. "We've got several police reform organizations ready to join your alliance. They're tired of officers like Mitchell damaging community trust." Kim nodded, then noticed another email marked urgent. "Washington Walker 2, 1996. Opening it, she found herself looking at security footage from a hospital in Atlanta. Another officer, following Mitchell's playbook, attempting to intimidate an Indian-American cardiologist. "They haven't learned," she said quietly. "They're still doing it, even after everything that's happened." "No," Agent Rodriguez corrected. "They're finally getting caught. Thanks to your stand, medical professionals everywhere are watching, recording, and reporting. The darkness only worked when people stayed silent." The next morning, Kim stood before an emergency meeting of the hospital's board of directors, presenting the latest developments in what the media had dubbed the Mitchell case. The boardroom's walls were covered with flowcharts showing the connections between identified officers in the Thin Blue Guard network. "This isn't just about individual incidents anymore," Kim explained, gesturing to the evidence. "We're looking at a coordinated effort to maintain racial hierarchies in medical settings through intimidation and abuse of authority." "Dr. Warren," Board Chairman Douglas interrupted, "while we fully support your stand against Officer Mitchell, there are concerns about escalating this into a national conflict. The hospital's relationships with law enforcement, corrector, are exactly what enabled this behavior." Kim finished firmly. "With respect, Chairman, that mindset is why Mitchell felt comfortable assaulting medical professionals in the first place." Her phone buzzed. Another message from Patricia. 3 more hospitals just reported similar incidents. "Pattern matching Mitchell's tactics exactly. They're watching the live stream of your board presentation." Kim turned back to the board. "Right now, hospitals across the country are documenting cases that mirror what happened here. The question isn't whether to engage in this conflict. The conflict is already here. The question is whether we'll protect our staff and patients or continue enabling abuse through silence." The boardroom door opened, and Patricia entered with a tablet. "Excuse the interruption, but you all need to see this." She connected the tablet to the main screen, displaying a live news broadcast. Mitchell Sr. was being led out of his house in handcuffs, while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence. The crawler beneath showed breaking news. Former deputy chief arrested. Evidence of systematic targeting of medical professionals uncovered. The FBI found recordings, Patricia announced. Strategy meetings where they explicitly discussed using police authority to put minority doctors in their place. They have him on conspiracy charges, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. The board members shifted uncomfortably, particularly those who'd argued for handling the Mitchell incident quietly. Kim let the implications sink in before continuing. "We have an opportunity here," she said, "not just to stop these attacks, but to fundamentally change how law enforcement interacts with medical facilities. The Chen Foundation has already pledged funding for a national training program. We can be part of the solution, or we can be remembered as an institution that knew about the problem and chose to look away." Her phone lit up again, this time with a message from Lieutenant Martinez. "Just found Mitchell Jr.'s complete target list. Over 60 medical professionals marked for intimidation, including 3 members of your board." Kim looked at the board members, seeing the dawning realization on their faces. This wasn't someone else's problem anymore. The cancer had spread throughout the entire system, and ignoring it was no longer an option. The board meeting had barely adjourned when Kim's phone erupted with urgent messages. A video was going viral. Another officer, this time in Chicago, attempting Mitchell's tactics on an African-American nurse. But something was different this time. "Watch this," Patricia said, pulling up the footage on her tablet. The scene showed a police officer trying to interrupt a cardiac procedure, but instead of finding an isolated victim, he faced a united front of medical staff. Security personnel appeared immediately, body cameras recording. The hospital's legal team arrived within minutes. They used our protocols, Kim realized, studying the footage. The response pattern we developed after Mitchell's attack, they implemented it perfectly. "It's happening everywhere," Patricia confirmed. "The Medical Professional Protection Alliance guidelines are being adopted nationwide. But there's more." She switched to another video, this one from a police body camera. An older white officer was stopping his younger partner from entering a trauma bay. "That's not how we do things anymore," the senior officer could be heard saying. "You want to end up like Mitchell?" Kim's office door opened, and Dr. Chen entered with Lieutenant Martinez. "You need to see this," Martinez said, looking troubled. "We just found something in Mitchell Sr.'s emails that changes everything." She handed Kim a printed document, an email chain dating back 5 years. It detailed a deliberate strategy to place certain officers in hospital liaison positions, specifically choosing those with traditional values, who would maintain proper order in medical settings. They were systematically positioning officers who shared their racist views, Martinez explained, using hospital security contracts as cover. "The network is bigger than we thought." Kim's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Rodriguez. "Get out of the hospital. FBI expanding investigation. Similar email chains found in 6 other cities. This goes up to department leadership level." "Dr. Warren," her assistant called from the doorway, "CNN is asking for an immediate interview. They're running a special report on police intimidation in hospitals tonight." Before Kim could respond, another message flashed across her screen, this one from an unexpected source. A group of police reform advocates, including several high-ranking officers of color, wanted to join forces with the Medical Professional Protection Alliance. "They're calling it a watershed moment," Patricia said, reading from her tablet. The Mitchell case is becoming a catalyst for examining racial power dynamics in all institutional interactions, not just healthcare. Lieutenant Martinez nodded grimly. We're seeing resignations across departments as more evidence comes out. Officers who participated in the Thin Blue Guard are trying to get ahead of the investigations. Kim sat back in her chair, processing the rapid developments. What had started as one confrontation in her ED had unleashed a national reckoning. But with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher, and she knew the backlash would only intensify. "They'll try to discredit us," she said finally, "paint this as an attack on law enforcement itself rather than on racist abuse of power." "Let them try," Patricia replied. "We have something they don't, irrefutable evidence and hundreds of witnesses ready to testify." 1 week after Mitchell Sr.'s arrest, Kim stood at the podium of the National Medical Association's Emergency Summit on Police Intimidation in Healthcare Settings. The auditorium was packed with medical professionals, law enforcement reformers, and civil rights advocates from across the country. "What we've uncovered isn't just a series of isolated incidents," Kim began, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "The Thin Blue Guard represents a systematic attempt to maintain racial hierarchies through intimidation and abuse of authority. But today, we're announcing a comprehensive response." Behind her, the screen displayed the new initiative, Project Guardian, a nationwide program combining security protocols, legal support, and real-time response teams for medical facilities facing law enforcement interference. The Chen Foundation has pledged $50 million to implement these protections in hospitals across America, Kim continued. But more importantly, we've partnered with reform-minded law enforcement leaders to develop new training protocols and accountability measures. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Agent Rodriguez. Mitchell Sr. talking, naming names, multiple department chiefs implicated. Prepare for major developments. As if on cue, Patricia rushed to the stage with breaking news. Kim glanced at the tablet and nodded, turning back to the audience. "I've just received word that the Department of Justice is launching a civil rights investigation into systematic targeting of medical professionals of color by law enforcement. The scope includes 27 police departments across 15 states." The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Kim raised her hand for silence. "But this isn't just about punitive measures. Today, we're also announcing the formation of the Healthcare Law Enforcement Alliance for Reform and Progress, Medical Film. This coalition brings together medical professionals, law enforcement reformers, and civil rights organizations to rebuild trust and establish new protocols for police interaction with medical facilities." Lieutenant Martinez, seated in the front row, nodded approvingly. She'd been instrumental in developing the new guidelines, drawing on her experience to identify potential points of conflict and resolution. Suddenly, Kim's phone lit up with multiple urgent messages. Something was happening at Metro General. "Dr. Warren," her assistant's text read, "Mitchell Jr.'s supporters are protesting outside the hospital. Some are armed. They're demanding we stop persecuting police officers." Another message from hospital security. "Counter-protesters arriving, medical students and staff from other hospitals coming to support us. Situation tense." Kim looked up at the audience, seeing the same determination she felt reflected in their faces. The battle lines were being drawn, not between medical professionals and law enforcement, but between those who sought to maintain systems of racial oppression and those fighting for change. "We're at a turning point," she told the crowd. "What happens next will determine whether hospitals remain places of healing for all people, or become battlegrounds for those trying to preserve hierarchies of power through fear. The scene outside Metro General was a powder keg waiting to explode. On one side, Mitchell's supporters wore blue line flags and carried signs reading "Support our police" and "Stop the war on cops." On the other, medical professionals from across the city stood in their white coats, forming a human chain to protect hospital access. Kim's helicopter landed on the roof as planned, giving her a clear aerial view of the situation. Lieutenant Martinez met her at the helipad, tablet in hand, showing live security feeds. "They're trying to block ambulance access," Martinez reported grimly, claiming they're conducting a peaceful protest, while effectively preventing emergency vehicles from reaching the ED, just like Mitchell did, Kim observed, using law and order as cover for endangering patients. "How many are armed?" "At least 30 that we can confirm. They're staying just within open carry laws while making their presence known." Kim's phone buzzed with an update from Patricia. "Social media shows this is coordinated. Similar protests starting at hospitals in 5 other cities, all targeting facilities that reported Thin Blue Guard activities." Before Kim could respond, Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple GSWs coming in. Drive-by shooting at a community center. At least 6 victims, 3 critical." They knew this was coming, Kim realized, her mind racing ahead. They planned these protests to coincide with a mass casualty event. They're trying to force a confrontation. Martinez nodded grimly, creating a situation where their armed presence seems justified. Classic escalation tactic. Kim reached for her phone, fingers flying across the screen as she activated the Project Guardian protocols they'd just announced. Within minutes, legal observers were en route, along with civil rights attorneys and independent media teams. Dr. Warren, a nurse, called through the radio. "The protesters are blocking the incoming trauma units. They're saying they'll only let them through if we agree to stop participating in the investigations." Kim's jaw tightened. "They're using dying patients as bargaining chips. Patch me through to the ED's external speakers." She took the offered microphone, her voice carrying across the crowd below. "To those blocking emergency access, you are currently preventing critical trauma care for multiple gunshot victims, including children. Your actions are being recorded and will be used as evidence of deliberate patient endangerment." The protesters wavered, some looking uncertain. Kim pressed her advantage. "Every moment you block these ambulances, you prove exactly why the Mitchell investigation is necessary. You're not protecting anyone, you're endangering lives to maintain power." Her phone lit up with live news feeds. The scene was being broadcast nationally, showing armed protesters actively preventing emergency medical care. The narrative they'd tried to create was backfiring spectacularly. "Give them 1 minute," Kim told Martinez. "Then we implement Operation Nightingale." Lieutenant Martinez smiled grimly, already coordinating with their reform-minded police allies. The protesters had no idea what was coming. Operation Nightingale launched with surgical precision. As the minute expired, dozens of medical transport helicopters appeared on the horizon, their rotors cutting through the tension-filled air. Simultaneously, a fleet of specialized medical vehicles emerged from side streets, mobile trauma units developed for disaster response. "They can block the ED," Kim announced through the speakers, "but they can't block the sky, and they can't block every street." The protesters' formation broke as they realized their blockade was meaningless. The hospital had adapted, creating new access points and alternative care routes. Their attempt to force compliance through patient endangerment had failed. Kim's phone buzzed with updates from across the city. The mobile trauma units were staffed by medical professionals who'd faced similar intimidation, doctors and nurses of color who'd volunteered for this exact scenario. Each unit was equipped with cameras, broadcasting the protesters' actions live across social media. "Dr. Warren," Patricia called through the radio, "Mitchell Sr. just issued a statement from jail, calling for his supporters to stand down. Says this isn't what he meant to happen." "Too late," Kim replied, watching as the first helicopter touched down on their secondary landing zone, a nearby parking structure pre-equipped for this purpose. "He created this monster. Now everyone can see exactly what it looks like." The trauma cases began arriving, each one documented in real time. Medical teams worked efficiently, their actions a stark contrast to the chaos the protesters had tried to create. Every patient movement was recorded, every blocked access point noted, every armed protester photographed. Lieutenant Martinez coordinated with her reform-minded officers who began methodically identifying protesters who had violated laws while claiming to support them. The irony wasn't lost on the watching media. "Kim," Dr. Chen's voice cracked through the radio, "you need to see this. The protesters' social media channels, they're imploding. Their own supporters are turning against them after seeing them block access to injured children." Kim's phone lit up with a message from Agent Rodriguez. "FBI monitoring protest channels. They're discussing more aggressive tactics. Be ready." "Already ahead of them," Kim replied, nodding to Martinez. They had anticipated escalation, prepared for it. The hospital's new security protocols weren't just defensive, they were designed to document and expose exactly this kind of coordinated intimidation. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the protest line. One of Mitchell's strongest supporters, a retired officer, had collapsed from a heart attack. The protesters turned to their own medical team, only to realize they didn't have one. Their entire strategy had been based on forcing the hospital to submit, never considering they might need medical care themselves. "Clear a path to the mobile trauma unit," Kim ordered through the radio, already moving toward the scene. "And make sure every camera catches this. They're about to see exactly who we are and who they are." The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Armed protesters who had tried to block medical care were now watching medical professionals rush to save one of their own without hesitation or discrimination. Kim worked methodically on the collapsed protester, her actions broadcast live across multiple platforms. Every movement was deliberate, professional, and completely neutral, a pointed demonstration of medical ethics in action. The man's fellow protesters watched in stunned silence as she saved the life of someone who'd been trying to prevent her from saving others. "BP stabilizing," she announced, her voice carrying clearly on the videos being streamed. "Get him to cardiac 1. As the mobile trauma unit transported their unexpected patient, Kim stood and addressed the remaining protesters directly, her voice amplified by the media presence. "This is who we are," she declared, still wearing gloves stained with the protesters' blood. "We don't ask about political views when someone's dying. We don't check party affiliation before performing CPR, and we certainly don't let racism determine who receives care." Her phone vibrated. Another update from Agent Rodriguez. Chatter shows protesters realizing they're losing the narrative, some suggesting violent response. SWAT on standby. But the momentum had already shifted. Videos of armed protesters blocking ambulances while medical teams saved children were going viral. The footage of them having to rely on the very people they'd been intimidating was being shared across all platforms. "Dr. Warren," Patricia called through her earpiece. "Mitchell Jr. just released a video statement from jail. You need to hear this." Kim nodded to Martinez, who pulled up the video on her tablet. Mitchell appeared haggard, his arrogance replaced by something approaching awareness. "Stand down," he told his supporters, his voice rough. This isn't what I thought it was. They saved Jenkins' life after we tried to block their ED. Just stand down." The protest lines began to waver as the video circulated. More supporters lowered their signs, some quietly slipping away. The armed contingent found themselves increasingly isolated, their weapons looking less like a show of strength and more like evidence of desperation. Kim's phone lit up with a message from the Chen Foundation. National medical organizations releasing joint statement. Full support for Project Guardian, funding secured for implementation in every major hospital. Another alert from Patricia. Police reform advocates using today's events as case study, showing how protect and serve became intimidate and control. Training programs being revised nationwide. The remaining protesters watched as another helicopter landed, this one bringing a specialized pediatric trauma team. The sight of small patients being rushed to care while armed adults tried to block their path was a powerful image, one that would define this moment in history. "Dr. Warren," Martinez called out, "we're getting reports of protesters at other hospitals standing down." The live streams from here changed minds. They are seeing what they are really supporting. Kim nodded, already moving toward the next incoming trauma case. The battle wasn't over, but something fundamental had shifted. They'd exposed the difference between those who wanted to maintain power through fear and those who served through healing. As evening approached, the protest scene had transformed dramatically. Where armed protesters had stood, medical students now organized relief stations. The weapons and threatening signs were replaced by water bottles and first aid kits. The shift in energy was palpable. Kim's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. "You need to see this. Mitchell Sr. requesting emergency meeting. Says he has information about higher-level coordination we need to know." "Set it up," Kim replied, "but on our terms. Full recording, multiple witnesses, legal team present." Before she could read the next message, Patricia rushed over with her tablet. "Breaking news. 3 police chiefs in different cities just resigned. Internal investigations found direct links to the Thin Blue Guard." But that's not the biggest story. She pulled up a document that made Kim's breath catch. It was an internal memo from 5 years ago, outlining a coordinated strategy to maintain traditional authority structures in medical settings. The signatures at the bottom included not just police officials, but hospital administrators and political figures. This was never just about Mitchell, Kim realized, scanning the names. He was just a foot soldier in a larger campaign to control who had power in healthcare. Her phone lit up with a call from Agent Rodriguez. "Dr. Warren, we're seeing movement in encrypted channels. The people behind this are getting nervous. They're starting to turn on each other." "Good," Kim replied, watching another helicopter land with critical patients. "Let them implode. Meanwhile, we'll keep doing our jobs." Lieutenant Martinez approached with fresh intelligence. "The armed protesters who left? They're showing up at other hospitals, but not to protest. They're surrendering their weapons and asking to help with patient transport. Something broke today." Kim nodded, understanding the significance. The image of medical professionals saving their opponents while under threat had shattered the narrative of conflict. It was hard to maintain hatred toward people you watched save your friends' lives. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the Chen family. "Kevin's research is being published posthumously. Systematic Intimidation in Healthcare, a study of racial power dynamics in emergency medicine. Major medical journals fast-tracking it." Dr. Warren, a young resident, called out, "You should see this. The medical students are organizing something." Kim looked where he pointed. Hundreds of students in white coats were forming lines, not to block, but to protect. They created efficient pathways for patient transport, their presence both professional and purposeful. Many were students of color, standing proudly in the spaces Mitchell and his supporters had tried to deny them. "It's happening at every hospital that reported Thin Blue Guard activity," Patricia added, showing her social media feeds. Medical students standing up, claiming their right to exist in these spaces. Kim's phone lit up with another urgent message, this one from Mitchell Sr.'s lawyer. He's ready to name names, all the way up. Says seeing doctors save his supporter changed everything. The pieces were falling into place faster than anyone had anticipated. The system of intimidation was crumbling, exposed not just by evidence, but by the undeniable contrast between those who sought to heal and those who sought to control. The meeting with Mitchell Sr. was set for midnight in a secure hospital conference room. Kim sat across from him, flanked by Patricia and Agent Rodriguez, while cameras recorded from multiple angles. The former deputy chief looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching shame. "Start from the beginning," Kim instructed, her voice neutral but firm. "Who gave the orders to target medical professionals of color?" Mitchell Sr. placed a thick folder on the table. It went higher than anyone realized. 5 years ago, there was a meeting, politicians, hospital board members, police officials. They saw the changing demographics in medical leadership as a threat to what they called traditional power structures. He opened the folder, revealing documents that made Patricia lean forward intently. They created a program called Medical Authority Preservation MAP. The Thin Blue Guard was just one component. They were placing people in hospital administration, credentialing committees, even medical school admissions. Kim's phone buzzed with real-time fact-checking from their investigative team, confirming names and dates. Multiple matches with suspicious hiring patterns across different institutions. "Why come forward now?" Agent Rodriguez asked, studying Mitchell's face. "Because I watched those doctors save Jenkins today," he replied, his voice rough. "He was one of our strongest supporters, and they didn't hesitate. Didn't ask who he was or what he believed. Just saved him. While we were trying to stop them from saving others." Kim's phone lit up with another urgent message, this one from Dr. Chen, more whistleblowers coming forward. Hospital administrators confessing to participating in MAP. "The whole system is unraveling," Mitchell continued, each word seeming to cost him. "We thought we were maintaining order, but we were just protecting privilege. My son, I encouraged him. Taught him to see threats where there were only people trying to help others." Patricia was rapidly documenting everything, her fingers flying across her tablet. Names, dates, locations, everything matches our existing evidence. This confirms the systematic nature of the discrimination. Suddenly, Kim's phone buzzed with breaking news, police chiefs in 12 cities announcing emergency press conferences. "Sources say mass resignations imminent." "They know I'm talking," Mitchell said, nodding at the phone. "The whole network is panicking. But here's what you really need to see." He pulled out another document, this one marked executive strategy. "They had a 20-year plan," he explained, his voice hollow. "Systematic removal of minority medical leadership through coordinated intimidation and administrative pressure. They called it demographic correction." Kim read the document, her clinical detachment barely containing her fury. The plan detailed everything from targeted harassment to manipulated complaints, all designed to drive medical professionals of color out of leadership positions. "Why now?" she asked finally, looking directly at Mitchell. "Why reveal this tonight? Because watching those doctors work today, seeing their students stand up despite our threats, it broke something in me, made me see what we'd really become. And my son," he paused, emotion finally cracking his voice. "My son became a monster because I taught him to be one." The next morning, Kim stood before a hastily assembled press conference as the revelations from Mitchell Sr.'s confession sent shockwaves through the medical and law enforcement communities. Behind her, screens displayed evidence of the MAP program's reach, while breaking news crawlers showed ongoing resignations across the country. "What we've uncovered," Kim began, her voice steady, "is not just individual bias or isolated incidents. The Medical Authority Preservation Program represents a coordinated, multi-year campaign to systematically exclude medical professionals of color from leadership positions through intimidation, administrative manipulation, and abuse of police authority." Her phone buzzed continuously with updates. Patricia, standing to the side, quickly sorted them by priority and passed crucial information forward. "In the past 12 hours, Kim continued, we've received confessions from 32 hospital administrators, 16 police officials, and multiple political figures involved in this program. But more importantly, we've identified over 300 medical professionals who were directly targeted." She paused as Patricia rushed forward with breaking news. Reading it quickly, Kim's expression hardened. "I've just been informed that the FBI has uncovered evidence of similar programs in other professional sectors, law, education, and corporate leadership. The systematic intimidation of professionals of color appears to be part of a broader strategy to maintain what they term demographic control across multiple fields." The room erupted with questions, but Kim raised her hand for silence. However, what these conspirators failed to understand is that true authority in medicine isn't maintained through intimidation. It's earned through competence, compassion, and dedication to saving lives. They sought to protect their power by endangering patients. We protected patients while they displayed their powerlessness. The phone lit up with another urgent message, this one from Lieutenant Martinez. "Mitchell Jr. requesting emergency meeting. Says he has evidence about medical school admissions tampering." Dr. Warren, a journalist, called out, "There are reports that medical students across the country are organizing protests against institutions implicated in MAP. Your response?" Kim smiled slightly. "Those aren't protests, they're affirmations. Students of all backgrounds standing together to declare that medicine belongs to everyone willing to dedicate themselves to healing. They're not fighting against something, they're standing for something." Patricia approached with her tablet, showing live feeds from hospitals nationwide. Medical students in white coats were gathering, creating human chains of unity rather than division. Many held signs reading "Healing knows no color and medicine is merit." "But there's something else you should see," Kim continued, gesturing to new data appearing on the screens. "Since these revelations began, we've seen a 40% increase in applications to medical programs from minority students. They're not being intimidated, they're being inspired. Every attempt to exclude has only strengthened their determination to serve." Her phone buzzed again, Agent Rodriguez updating her on the expanding investigation. The MAP program had tentacles reaching into medical licensing boards, research grant committees, and hospital credentialing systems. The scope of the conspiracy was still growing. The meeting with Mitchell Jr. took place in a secure hospital room, where he was still under guard following his arrest. Unlike his father's defeated demeanor, Jr. appeared energized, almost manic, as he spread documents across his bed. "You don't understand," he began, his hands shaking slightly. "The medical school thing, it wasn't just about admissions. They had a whole system for driving students out even after they got in." Kim sat carefully, maintaining professional distance while Patricia recorded everything. "Explain." "Clinical rotations, residency placements, fellowship recommendations, all of it was rigged," Mitchell Jr. continued. "They called it natural selection, but there was nothing natural about it. They were deliberately creating hostile environments, using police presence to add pressure." His hands moved frantically through papers. "Look, they tracked everything. Stress levels, complaint patterns, even personal relationships. They knew exactly how much pressure to apply before someone would break." Kim's phone buzzed with verification from their investigative team, confirming patterns in residency attrition rates. "Significant correlation with MAP program presence. Why are you sharing this now?" Kim asked, studying Mitchell's face carefully. He laughed, a hollow sound. "Because I was stupid enough to think I was special, that I was chosen for my merit, my dedication to maintaining order. But I was just a tool, and when I got caught, they dropped me instantly." Patricia leaned forward. "You have evidence of this?" "Better," Mitchell replied, pulling out a USB drive. I have recordings. Every meeting where they planned it, every training session where they taught us how to make it look legitimate. They thought I was recording for their protection, documenting their proper procedures. Kim's phone lit up with messages from Agent Rodriguez, major breakthrough in parallel investigations. Similar recording systems found in other cities. They documented everything, thinking it protected them. There's more, Mitchell continued, his words tumbling out faster. The demographic correction wasn't just about current professionals. They were planning generations ahead, systematically discouraging minority students from even considering medical careers. He pulled out another document, this one showing a flow chart of intervention points from high school career counseling to undergraduate pre-med programs. They called it stream management, he explained, directing certain demographics toward more suitable careers, using everything from financial pressure to subtle intimidation. Kim's phone buzzed again, Dr. Shen updating her on immediate impacts, medical schools nationwide reviewing admissions patterns. Evidence of systematic bias emerging. Class action lawsuits being prepared. Why should we trust you? Kim asked Mitchell directly. This could be another manipulation. His face crumpled slightly. Because watching you save Jenkins, watching all of you work despite everything we did, it showed me what real authority looks like. Not the power to intimidate, but the power to heal. The next 48 hours brought a tsunami of revelations. Kim sat in her office, reviewing the flood of data from Mitchell Jr.'s USB drive, while Patricia coordinated with legal teams across the country. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. They had psychological profiles, Patricia explained, displaying documents on the wall screen. Not just of current medical professionals, but of potential future ones. They were identifying minority students showing interest in medicine as early as middle school. Kim's phone buzzed with updates from Agent Rodriguez found their predictive modeling software. They were using AI to identify and track demographic threats, their term for promising minority students likely to succeed in medicine. Look at this, Patricia continued, pulling up another document. They had a ranking system. Students were coded green, yellow, or red based on their likelihood of persisting despite obstacles. The ones marked red, those were the ones they targeted most aggressively. Kim studied the data, her clinical mind noting patterns. They weren't just trying to exclude people, they were specifically targeting the most resilient ones. The students most likely to overcome traditional barriers. Her phone lit up with breaking news, Medical School Association announcing emergency audit of all admissions data from past decade. Early findings suggest systematic manipulation of interview scores and recommendation letters. Dr. Warren, her assistant, called through the intercom, "You need to see this. The students are organizing something big." Kim pulled up the live feeds on her screen. At medical schools across the country, students were conducting their own investigations, cross-referencing their experiences with the revealed MAP protocols. They were creating databases of suspicious incidents, patterns of discouragement, unexplained barriers. They're calling it the Truth in Medicine campaign, Patricia noted, showing social media trends. Students sharing stories of how they were nearly driven out of medicine by what they now recognize as systematic intimidation. Kim's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the Chen Foundation, launching emergency support program for affected students. Full scholarships, legal support, counseling services, already identifying hundreds who were pushed out of medical education. Suddenly, Dr. Chen burst into the office. "Kim, you need to see this. The medical students, they're not just documenting past abuse. They're creating a new system." He pulled up a website on the main screen. Students had developed a mutual support network, connecting those who had faced discrimination with mentors who had survived similar experiences. They were turning the MAP program's tactics inside out, using the same detailed tracking to identify and support vulnerable students. "They're calling it Operation Healing Justice," Dr. Shen explained. "For every student MAP tried to push out, they're bringing 2 more in. They're using the exposed documents as a blueprint for resistance." Kim's phone lit up with another update from Agent Rodriguez, more whistleblowers coming forward. Hospital administrators, medical school faculty, even police officers involved in student intimidation. The whole system is unraveling. The revelations about medical school manipulation hit particularly close to home when Kim received a message from her own alma mater. The dean of Harvard Medical School requested an emergency video conference, his face grave as he appeared on her screen. "Dr. Warren, we've been conducting an internal audit following the map revelations," he began, his voice tight. "We found disturbing patterns, including in your own student file." Kim leaned forward as he shared his screen. There it was, her own academic history, marked with coded annotations she'd never seen before. Red flags, warning notes, suggested intervention points. "They tried to fail me out during my surgery rotation," Kim realized, reading the hidden comments. "Those impossible situations, the attending who seemed determined to break me, it wasn't random." Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia, similar findings at other top medical schools. Systematic targeting of high-performing minority students, especially in competitive specialties like surgery. "Dr. Warren," the dean continued, "we're finding these patterns going back decades. Generations of brilliant physicians either driven out or forced to fight extraordinary battles just to survive their education." Kim's mind flashed to her own struggles, the night she'd questioned whether she belonged, the constant need to be twice as good just to be considered half as worthy. It hadn't been imposter syndrome, it had been engineered doubt. "Send me everything," she instructed the dean. "Every file, every coded notation. We're going to map the entire system of discrimination." Her phone lit up with another urgent message, this one from Dr. Chen, students organizing national walkout. Not to protest, but to conduct their own investigations. They're calling it Operation Clean House. Patricia rushed in with her tablet. "You need to see this. Medical students are cross-referencing their experiences with the exposed map documents. They're identifying faculty members who were part of the system." The dean nodded grimly. "It's happening at every medical school. Students are demanding transparency, reviewing old complaint files, connecting patterns of discrimination that were previously dismissed as isolated incidents." Kim's phone buzzed again. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence of a shadow mentorship program. Certain faculty were tasked with specifically discouraging minority students from competitive specialties, steering them toward more suitable paths. "But here's what they didn't expect," Kim said, pulling up the latest data. "Every student they targeted, every barrier they created, every moment of engineered doubt hit a paper trail. They documented their own discrimination, thinking it protected them. Instead, they built the evidence for their own exposure." The dean leaned forward. "Dr. Warren, we want you to lead a national task force. Complete audit of medical education, from admissions to residency placement. Full transparency, no matter what we find." Her phone lit up with messages from other medical schools joining the initiative. The very institutions that had been compromised by MAP were now competing to be the most aggressive in rooting out discrimination. The task force headquarters was established in Metro General's conference center, transformed into a command center for what the media had dubbed the Warikal. Screens covered the walls, displaying real-time data from medical schools nationwide as students and faculty worked to expose decades of systematic discrimination. Another pattern emerging, Patricia announced, updating the main display. They specifically targeted minority students interested in leadership positions. Anyone showing administrative ambition was flagged for increased scrutiny. Kim's phone buzzed with updates from Harvard, found correlation between MAP interventions and student health issues. They were literally making students sick with manufactured stress. Dr. Warren, a medical student representative, called out, "You need to see this. We're finding evidence of coordinated gaslighting, deliberate attempts to make targeted students question their own competence and mental stability." Kim moved to the student station, reviewing the compiled data. The psychological manipulation was precisely calculated, just enough pressure to create doubt, not enough to trigger obvious discrimination complaints. Her phone lit up with a message from Agent Rodriguez, uncovered their training materials. They called it selective pressure application, detailed protocols for breaking confident minority students without leaving evidence. But they did leave evidence, Kim noted, addressing the room. They documented everything, creating the very database we're now using to expose them. Patricia approached with her tablet. More whistleblowers coming forward. Former faculty members, administrators, even mental health counselors who were pressured to pathologize normal reactions to discrimination. Suddenly, Dr. Shen burst in with breaking news. "Kim, the students found something big. They've uncovered a pattern of altered test scores, not just in medical schools but in licensing exams. Kim's phone buzzed urgently, multiple messages flooding in as the news broke. Medical boards across the country were launching emergency audits. Thousands of exam results were being reviewed for evidence of manipulation. They didn't just want to keep us out, Kim realized, studying the patterns. They wanted to control how far we could advance, even if we got in. Every step up the ladder was rigged. Her phone lit up with another message, this one from the Chen Foundation, launching emergency support program for affected physicians. Legal teams standing by for license restoration cases. Dr. Warren called another student researcher. We found their demographic projections. They had models predicting when minority physicians would reach critical mass in leadership positions. The entire MAP program was designed to prevent that tipping point. Kim moved to the central display, watching as data points coalesced into clear patterns of systematic oppression. But something else was emerging too, patterns of resistance, of survival, of excellence despite extraordinary obstacles. They documented their own crimes, she announced to the room, but they also documented our resilience. Every physician who succeeded despite their barriers, every student who persisted despite their pressure, they're all in these files too. Her phone buzzed with a final message for the day. This one from Mitchell Jr. found their worst fear. Their models showed that if they didn't stop it, minority physicians would reach majority status in medical leadership by 2040. That's what scared them into creating MAP. The task force's findings triggered an unprecedented wave of accountability across medical institutions. Kim stood at her office window, watching as another group of medical students arrived, their white coats now bearing patches reading Truth Healers, the symbol of their investigation teams. Latest numbers are in, Patricia reported, entering with her tablet. 342 faculty members identified as active MAP participants. 97 deans or department heads implicated. Over 2,000 cases of documented discrimination requiring review. Kim's phone buzzed with an update from Agent Rodriguez found their recruitment protocols. They specifically targeted white male faculty with traditional values for positions of authority. Created entire shadow networks in medical education. But here's what's really interesting, Patricia continued, pulling up new data. The students aren't just exposing discrimination, they're reconstructing alternative histories. Finding the minority physicians who should have advanced, tracking where their careers were artificially stunted. A message flashed across Kim's phone, Dr. Chen sharing breaking news, first wave of restoration cases approved. Medical boards reinstating licenses that were unfairly revoked. Already identifying brilliant physicians forced out of practice by MAP interventions. Dr. Warren, her assistant, called through the intercom. The preliminary report from the licensing board audit is ready. It's worse than we thought. Kim opened the document on her screen, her clinical detachment wavering as she absorbed the scope of the manipulation. They hadn't just altered individual scores, they'd adjusted the entire scoring algorithm to disadvantage certain demographic patterns. Her phone lit up with messages from medical schools across the country, departments discovering hidden evaluation criteria, residency programs finding coded systems for ranking applicants, fellowship committees uncovering systematic bias in selection processes. They built discrimination into the very infrastructure of medical education, Kim observed, studying the patterns. But they also built the tools for their own exposure. Every algorithm, every coded system, every hidden criterion, it's all documented. Patricia nodded grimly. The students are calling it the architecture of exclusion. They're mapping how each component worked together to create systematic barriers while maintaining plausible deniability. Suddenly, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. Kim, you need to see this. The students found something in the MAP predictive models, something they didn't expect. He pulled up a complex data visualization on the main screen. These are their simulation runs, showing what would happen if they failed to stop demographic changes in medicine. But look at the patient outcome projections. Kim studied the data, her eyes widening as she understood. Their own models showed that increasing diversity in medical leadership would improve patient care across all demographics. They knew their discrimination was harming patients, even their own. Her phone buzzed with another urgent message, this one from the Chen Foundation, ready to launch Phase 2. National program to identify and support minority physicians returning to practice. Full resources for retraining, legal support, and practice establishment. The next revelation came from an unexpected source. A group of medical students analyzing MAP data discovered a pattern in patient mortality rates that correlated directly with the program's success in excluding minority physicians from leadership positions. They knew, Kim announced to the assembled task force, displaying the damning statistics. Their own data showed that reducing diversity in medical leadership increased death rates across all patient populations, but they proceeded anyway. Her phone buzzed with confirmation from Agent Rodriguez, found internal memos discussing the mortality data. They classified it as acceptable collateral damage in maintaining traditional medical hierarchy. Dr. Warren called out a student researcher. We've identified their decision points. Every time they had to choose between improving patient outcomes and maintaining demographic control, they chose control. Patricia rushed in with her tablet. Breaking news. Major medical journals announcing emergency review of all published research from MEMAPI-affiliated institutions. Concerns about data manipulation to hide diversity benefits. Kim's phone lit up with messages from hospital boards across the country. The revelation that MAP had knowingly sacrificed patient safety for demographic control was triggering a wave of emergency leadership changes. But here's what's really significant, Dr. Chen added, pulling up new analysis. The areas where they fought hardest to exclude minority leadership, emergency medicine, surgery, critical care, those are exactly where diverse leadership showed the strongest positive impact on patient outcomes. A message flashed across Kim's screen, the Chen Foundation sharing urgent data, correlating MAP activity with preventable deaths. Initial estimates suggest thousands of lives lost due to enforced lack of diversity in medical leadership. Dr. Warren, another student, called out, we found their cost-benefit analyses. They actually calculated the number of acceptable deaths to prevent what they called demographic disruption in medical hierarchy. Kim moved to the central display, studying the cold calculations that had prioritized racial control over human lives. Her clinical training helped her maintain composure, but the implications were staggering. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Sr. There's more. Check the insurance data. They manipulated coverage patterns to reinforce their control systems. Patricia was already pulling up the referenced files. He's right. They used insurance networks to channel patients away from minority physicians, especially in affluent areas. Created artificial success metrics based on deliberately manipulated patient demographics. But they documented everything, Kim noted, watching the patterns emerge on screen. Every decision, every calculation, every life they deemed expendable, it's all here in their own data. Her phone lit up with another urgent message. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence of similar programs in other healthcare sectors. Pharmaceutical research, medical device development, healthcare policy. The whole system was rigged. The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. MAP hadn't just been about controlling who could practice medicine, it had been about controlling who lived and died, all in service of maintaining racial hierarchies. The revelation about MAP's deliberate sacrifice of patient lives for demographic control exploded across national media. Kim found herself addressing an emergency congressional hearing, the chamber packed with legislators and media as she presented the task force's findings. What we've uncovered, she began, her voice steady, is not just discrimination against medical professionals. It is a systematic choice to increase patient mortality rates across all demographics in order to maintain racial hierarchies in medical leadership. Her phone buzzed with real-time updates from Patricia, medical boards nationwide announcing emergency reviews. Every death in MAP-influenced institutions being re-examined. The data is unequivocal, Kim continued, gesturing to the displays behind her. MAP's own analyses showed that diverse medical leadership saved more lives, yet they actively worked to prevent that diversity, accepting increased death rates as an acceptable cost of maintaining what they called traditional medical authority. A message flashed across her phone, Dr. Shen sharing breaking news, first wave of wrongful death lawsuits filed. Families discovering loved ones died in institutions where more qualified minority physicians were deliberately excluded. But perhaps most disturbing, Kim pressed on, is that this program wasn't limited to individual institutions. It represented a coordinated effort across healthcare systems to prioritize racial control over patient survival. Her phone lit up again. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found their leadership communications. They explicitly discussed trading higher mortality rates for demographic stability in medical hierarchy. A senator leaned forward. "Dr. Warren, are you suggesting that people died specifically because of this program?" "I'm not suggesting it," Kim replied, her voice sharp. "I'm stating it as a documented fact. MAPE's own data shows that their successful exclusion of minority physicians from leadership positions directly correlated with increased patient deaths they knew were preventable." Patricia approached with her tablet, showing new analysis. The impact wasn't limited to minority patients. Their actions increased mortality rates across all demographic groups, including the very populations they claimed to be protecting. Kim's phone buzzed with another urgent message, this one from the Chen Foundation, launching national database of MEB-related deaths. Families can check if loved ones died in compromised institutions. Members of Congress, Kim continued, this wasn't just about career advancement or professional opportunity. This was about a deliberate choice to let people die rather than allow medical leadership to become more diverse. The chamber erupted in questions, but Kim held up her hand, not finished. "And before you ask about unintended consequences, let me be clear, they knew. Their own models showed the mortality impact. They had the data showing diverse leadership saved more lives. They chose to proceed anyway, declaring those deaths an acceptable price for maintaining racial control of medicine." Her phone lit up with breaking news. Medical schools across the country were announcing emergency leadership changes, desperate to distance themselves from the growing scandal. The congressional hearings revelations triggered immediate action. Within hours, the Justice Department announced a special task force to investigate what the media now called the medical mortality conspiracy. Kim watched from her office as the news coverage exploded. Latest numbers, Patricia reported, entering with fresh data. Initial reviews suggest over 20,000 preventable deaths potentially linked to MAPE's demographic control policies. And that's just in the first wave of investigations. Kim's phone buzzed with an update from Agent Rodriguez, found their demographic impact calculations. They literally mapped how many additional deaths they considered acceptable for each percentage point of traditional democracy maintenance in medical leadership. "Dr. Warren," her assistant called through the intercom, "the families are here." Kim took a deep breath, preparing for perhaps the hardest meeting yet. The conference room was filled with people who had just learned their loved ones' deaths might have been prevented if not for MAPE's racist policies. "We found the pattern in my mother's case," a young woman began, her voice trembling. The hospital had removed 3 highly qualified minority physicians from leadership positions the year she died. Their own data showed mortality rates increased after those changes. Kim's phone lit up with messages from similar family groups forming across the country. They were calling themselves MAP mortality survivors, organizing to demand accountability. "But here's what's really significant," Patricia added, pulling up new analysis. "They didn't just accept higher death rates, they actively worked to hide the connection between their demographic controls and patient outcomes." A message flashed across Kim's screen. Dr. Chen, sharing urgent data, found their publication suppression protocols. They systematically blocked research showing benefits of diverse medical leadership on patient survival. "Dr. Warren," called one of the family members, "we found something in my father's records." They actually transferred him away from a more qualified minority physician to maintain what they called demographic comfort levels in their premium care units. Kim moved to the main display, showing the complex web of MAPE's patient allocation systems. They hadn't just excluded minority physicians, they had actively redirected patients to maintain racial hierarchies in medical care. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Sr. "There's worse. Check the emergency response protocols. They built racial preferences into triage algorithms." Patricia was already accessing the reference files. "He's right. They modified emergency response systems to prioritize maintaining demographic patterns in patient-physician matching, even in life-threatening situations." "They killed our people," another family member spoke up, not through active malice, but through calculated indifference. They decided maintaining white control of medicine was worth sacrificing lives, all lives, even white ones. Kim's phone lit up with another urgent message. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence they actively recruited hospital administrators who would prioritize demographic control over patient outcomes. They called it value alignment. The revelation about MAPE's manipulation of emergency response protocols sparked immediate investigations at trauma centers nationwide. Kim found herself coordinating with emergency medicine departments across the country as they uncovered the extent of the corruption. They built it into the basic algorithms, Dr. Chen explained, displaying the triage software code. Every emergency response system had hidden weighted factors favoring what they called demographic stability in physician assignment. Kim's phone buzzed with updates from trauma centers discovering similar patterns. The very systems designed to save lives had been subtly modified to maintain racial hierarchies, even in life or death situations. Dr. Warren called out a systems analyst. We found their override protocols. In mass casualty situations, they had specific instructions for maintaining appropriate demographic distribution in physician response teams. Patricia rushed in with her tablet. Breaking news: major emergency response software companies announcing emergency audits. They're finding MAP influence in basic coding architecture. Kim's phone lit up with a message from Agent Rodriguez. Found their emergency medicine training materials. They specifically taught responders to consider cultural compatibility in physician assignments during crises. But here's the worst part, Dr. Chen continued, pulling up mortality data. Their own statistics showed higher survival rates when emergency response teams were diverse. They knew they were sacrificing lives for demographic control, even in disaster situations. A message flashed across Kim's screen, the Chen Foundation sharing urgent analysis, correlating MAP protocols with mass casualty outcomes. Initial data suggests significantly higher mortality rates in incidents where diverse response teams were artificially restricted. Dr. Warren, another analyst, called out, we found their disaster planning scenarios. They actually calculated acceptable casualty increases to maintain what they called demographic comfort levels in emergency response. Kim moved to the central display, studying the cold calculations that had prioritized racial appearance over medical expertise during crises. The implications for disaster response were staggering. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Jr. Check the helicopter response protocols. They built racial routing into air ambulance systems. Patricia was already accessing the reference systems. He's right. They modified flight patterns and hospital destinations based on maintaining demographic patterns in receiving facilities. They corrupted every level of an emergency response, Kim observed, watching the patterns emerge. From basic ambulance routing to major disaster protocols, all to maintain racial control of medicine. Her phone lit up with another urgent message. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence they specifically targeted diverse trauma teams for disruption. They saw emergency medicine as a crucial control point for maintaining medical hierarchies. The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. MAP hadn't just manipulated individual medical careers, they had compromised the entire emergency response infrastructure, prioritizing racial control over saving lives in crisis situations. The investigation into emergency response corruption led to an even more disturbing discovery. Late one night, as Kim reviewed data with her team, a pattern emerged in disaster response training protocols that made her blood run cold. They weren't just manipulating individual emergencies, she announced, pulling up the training documents. They were systematically preparing for what they called demographic emergencies, situations where disasters might naturally lead to more diverse medical leadership. Her phone buzzed with confirmation from Agent Rodriguez. Found their contingency plans. They had specific protocols for preventing minority medical professionals from gaining authority during major crises, even when they were the most qualified responders. Dr. Warren called out a data analyst, you need to see this. They actually ran simulations of various disasters, calculating how to maintain demographic control even if it meant higher casualties. Patricia approached with her tablet. Breaking news: FEMA launching emergency investigation. Discovering MAP influence in national disaster response planning. Kim's phone lit up with messages from emergency management agents across the country. The revelation that disaster response had been compromised by racial agenda was triggering widespread reviews of emergency protocols. But here's what's truly shocking, Dr. Chen added, displaying new analysis. They specifically targeted areas with high minority populations for reduced emergency response capabilities, ensuring that even in crises, medical authority would remain under their control. A message flashed across Kim's screen, the Chen Foundation sharing urgent data, correlating MAP protocols with disaster outcomes, finding systematic patterns of higher casualties in areas where diverse medical leadership was artificially suppressed. Dr. Warren, another analyst, called out, "We found their pandemic response plans. They actually had protocols for maintaining demographic control even during public health emergencies." Kim moved to examine the pandemic protocols, her medical training helping her understand the horrific implications. They had built racial hierarchies into disease response planning, prioritizing demographic control over public health. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Sr., "Check the emergency supply distribution protocols." They built demographic preferences into medical resource allocation during crises. Patricia was already accessing the supply chain data. He's right. They modified emergency resource distribution to maintain what they called appropriate demographic authority over medical supplies during disasters. They weren't just controlling current medical leadership, Kim realized, studying the patterns. They were trying to ensure that even major disasters couldn't disrupt their racial hierarchies. Her phone lit up with another urgent message. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence they specifically prepared for climate-related disasters, viewing them as potential threats to their demographic control of medicine. The implications were staggering. MAP hadn't just corrupted current medical systems, they had tried to ensure their racial control would survive even major societal disruptions. As the scope of MAP's disaster response corruption became clear, Kim found herself addressing an emergency session of the National Disaster Medical System conference. The room was packed with emergency response coordinators, disaster medicine specialists, and public health officials. "What we've uncovered," she began, her voice carrying across the stunned audience, "is not just discrimination in everyday medical practice. MAP built racial control mechanisms into our very ability to respond to national disasters." Her phone buzzed with real-time updates from Patricia. State emergency management agencies finding MAP protocols embedded in their basic response frameworks. They didn't just want to control who led medical teams, Kim continued, displaying the evidence. They created systems to ensure that even in worst-case scenarios, pandemics, natural disasters, mass casualty events, their demographic hierarchies would remain intact. A message flashed across her phone. Dr. Shen, sharing breaking news, found their crisis simulation data. They actually practiced maintaining racial control during scenarios including major earthquakes, hurricane responses, even bioterror attacks. But perhaps most disturbing, Kim pressed on, is that they knowingly built these controls into our national emergency stockpile distribution systems. They created protocols ensuring that even in dire emergencies, medical authority would follow their preferred demographic patterns. Her phone lit up again. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, uncovered their long-term planning documents. They viewed climate change and increasing natural disasters as threats to their control of medicine and planned accordingly. A FEMA director stood up. "Dr. Warren, are you suggesting they compromised our basic disaster response capabilities just to maintain racial control?" "That's exactly what I'm stating," Kim replied firmly. Their own documents show they were willing to accept higher casualty rates in major disasters rather than allow natural emergency conditions to create more diverse medical leadership. Patricia approached with her tablet, showing new analysis. "We're finding their influence in everything from field hospital deployment protocols to emergency medical volunteer coordination systems." Kim's phone buzzed with another urgent message, this time from the Chen Foundation, launching emergency audit of disaster response training programs nationwide. Finding systematic bias in how medical leadership is assigned during crises. "What you need to understand," Kim continued, addressing the shocked audience, "is that this wasn't just about individual bias. They created entire systems designed to ensure that even when normal medical hierarchies broke down during disasters, their racial control would remain intact." The room erupted in questions, but Kim held up her hand, not finished. They saw major disasters not just as medical emergencies, but as threats to their demographic control. Every protocol, every procedure, every response plan was designed with maintaining racial hierarchies as a primary consideration, even at the cost of higher casualties. Her phone lit up with breaking news. Emergency management agencies across the country were announcing immediate reviews of their disaster response protocols, racing to identify and remove MAPE's corrupting influence. The final pieces of MAPE's conspiracy began falling into place as Kim and her team uncovered their ultimate contingency plans. Hidden deep in encrypted files were detailed protocols for what they called demographic emergency response, plans for maintaining racial control of medicine even during societal collapse. They weren't just thinking about current disasters, Kim explained to the assembled task force. They created systems to ensure their control would survive even apocalyptic scenarios. Her phone buzzed with confirmation from Agent Rodriguez found their long-term survival protocols. They designated certain medical facilities as demographic preservation centers meant to maintain traditional hierarchies even during civilization-threatening events. Dr. Warren called out a data analyst. We found their genetic database. They were actually collecting DNA samples from medical professionals, categorizing them for what they called demographic continuity planning. Patricia rushed in with her tablet. Breaking news, CDC launching investigation. MAP had influence in national medical emergency protocols all the way up to doomsday scenarios. Kim's phone lit up with messages from medical facilities discovering they'd been designated as preservation centers, institutions chosen to maintain MAPE's racial hierarchies even during social collapse. But here's what's truly chilling, Dr. Chen added, displaying new analysis. They weren't just planning for natural disasters. They had protocols for maintaining demographic control during everything from nuclear war to global pandemics. A message flashed across Kim's screen. The Chen Foundation, sharing urgent data, found their selection criteria for survival facilities. They prioritized maintaining racial hierarchies over medical expertise, even in extinction-level events. Dr. Warren, another analyst, called out, we found their succession planning documents. They had detailed protocols for ensuring medical authority would follow their preferred demographic patterns even after societal reconstruction. Kim moved to examine the succession plans, her medical training helping her grasp the horrific implications. They had built racial control mechanisms into the very foundations of post-disaster medical recovery. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Sr. Check the underground medical facility plans. They built demographic controls into survival bunker medical staffing. Patricia was already accessing the facility documents. He's right. They modified emergency bunker designs to ensure what they called appropriate demographic authority would survive any catastrophe. They weren't just controlling current medicine, Kim realized, studying the patterns. They were trying to ensure their racial hierarchies would survive even the end of civilization as we know it. Her phone lit up with another urgent message. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, found evidence they were creating secret caches of medical supplies designated specifically for maintaining demographic control during long-term societal disruption. The room fell silent as the full scope of MAPE's plans became clear. They hadn't just corrupted current medical systems, they had attempted to ensure their racial control would endure even through the collapse and rebuilding of civilization itself. As the final revelations about MAPE's doomsday plans emerged, Kim found herself preparing for what would become a historic address to a joint session of Congress. The chamber was packed, with overflow crowds watching on screens throughout the Capitol. What we've uncovered, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, is not just a conspiracy to control current medical practice. MAP created an elaborate system designed to ensure racial hierarchies in medicine would survive anything, even the collapse of civilization itself. Her phone buzzed with real-time updates from Patricia, National Security Council convening emergency session. MAPE's doomsday plans classified as threat to national survival capability. They didn't just corrupt our current medical systems, Kim continued, displaying the evidence. They built their racial control mechanisms into the very framework of our society's medical survival plans. Every emergency protocol, every disaster response, every survival facility was designed to maintain their demographic hierarchies, even if it meant compromising our species' ability to survive catastrophic events. A message flashed across her phone. Dr. Chen, sharing breaking news, found their extinction event protocols. They actually preferred higher casualty rates over allowing diverse medical leadership during species-threatening disasters. But perhaps most disturbing, Kim pressed on, is that they saw potential extinction-level events not as challenges to human survival, but as threats to their racial control of medicine. They were willing to compromise humanity's survival chances to maintain their preferred demographic patterns. Her phone lit up again. Agent Rodriguez, updating her, uncovered their post-apocalyptic planning documents. They had detailed protocols for ensuring minority medical professionals wouldn't gain authority even during societal reconstruction. A senator stood up. "Dr. Warren, are you suggesting they compromised our basic survival capabilities just to maintain racial control?" "That's exactly what I'm stating," Kim replied firmly. Their own documents show they were willing to accept higher extinction risks rather than allow natural disaster conditions to create more diverse medical leadership. Patricia approached with her tablet, showing new analysis. "We're finding their influence in everything from seed vault medical staffing to space colony health protocols." Kim's phone buzzed with another urgent message, this time from the Chen Foundation, launching emergency audit of all long-term survival facilities. Finding systematic bias in medical authority structures built into humanity's backup plans. "What you need to understand," Kim continued, addressing the stunned lawmakers, "is that this wasn't just about current control. They created entire systems designed to ensure their racial hierarchies would survive even the end of human civilization as we know it." The chamber erupted in questions, but Kim held up her hand, not finished. They saw potential human extinction not just as a threat to our species, but as a threat to their demographic control. Every survival protocol, every backup plan, every reconstruction scenario was designed with maintaining racial hierarchies as a primary consideration, even at the cost of human survival itself. Her phone lit up with breaking news. Government agencies worldwide were announcing immediate reviews of their civilization's survival protocols, racing to identify and remove MAPE's corrupting influence before it was too late. 1 year after the initial confrontation in Metro General's emergency department, Kim stood in the same trauma bay where it all began. The hospital had changed dramatically, new protocols, diverse leadership, and a commitment to equality that went beyond mere words. "Final numbers are in," Patricia reported, entering with her tablet. MAPE's infrastructure has been completely dismantled. Over 3,000 medical professionals reinstated, 14,000 cases of discrimination addressed, and every major medical institution reformed. Kim's phone buzzed with an update from Agent Rodriguez. "Last MAP conspirator sentenced today. Complete overhaul of medical emergency protocols nationwide. Your new systems are becoming global standards." Dr. Warren called a young resident, one of many who had joined Metro General specifically because of the changes. The first graduates of the Chen Foundation Medical Justice Program are starting their residencies today. Kim smiled, remembering Kevin Chen and how his death had sparked a revolution in medicine. The program, named in his honor, had already helped hundreds of minority students enter medical school, creating the diverse future MAP had fought so hard to prevent. "But here's what's really significant," Dr. Chen added, displaying the latest statistics. "Patient outcomes have improved across all demographics. The diversity MAP feared has actually saved more lives than we initially projected." A message flashed across Kim's screen, the Chen Foundation sharing their annual report, medical leadership demographics shifting faster than predicted. Positive impact on patient care exceeding all expectations. Dr. Warren, another staff member, called out, "You should see this. The medical students are organizing something." Kim moved to the window, watching as hundreds of students in white coats gathered outside. They carried signs reading "Medicine for All" and "Healing Knows No Color." But what caught her eye was their diversity, exactly what MAP had feared and fought against. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mitchell Sr., still serving his sentence. "You were right. We were killing people to maintain control. The changes you've made, they're saving lives we would have sacrificed." Patricia approached with breaking news. "The World Health Organization is adopting your protocols globally. They're calling it the Warren Standards for Medical Equality." "It was never just about us," Kim observed, watching the next generation of doctors below. "It was about every patient who deserves the best care, regardless of who provides it. Every life MAP would have sacrificed for their hierarchy." Her phone lit up with final confirmation, Agent Rodriguez updating her. Last of the MAP survival facilities converted to true medical emergency centers. Demographic controls completely removed from disaster protocols. Kim turned to address her staff, seeing the changes reflected in their faces, diverse, confident, and united in purpose. 1 year ago, we exposed a conspiracy that valued control over healing, she began. Today, we've replaced it with something better, a medical system that values every life, develops every talent, and serves every patient with equal dedication. Outside, the next generation of doctors continued to gather, their presence a living testament to the change one person's stand against injustice could inspire. The future MAP had feared had arrived, and it was saving more lives than they ever could have imagined.